We're taking a look back at some of the biggest stories from 2020, and we're revisiting the search for Breasia Terrell. She's been missing since July 10th this year. We're going to go over what we know about Breasia's disappearance. Now, Henry Dinkins is believed to be the last person to see Breasia. She was staying the night with him and her brother on Thursday, July 9th. The next day, she was reported missing. Dinkins was arrested for failing to register his address as a sex offender. Not long after July 14th, police named him as a person of interest in Breasia's disappearance. Now, police asked people to come forward with information about where Dinkins had been the past few days, and if anybody had seen the cars he's associated with. That's 3 of them there right now.
When someone looks into the eyes of their victim, do they see a person or just an obstacle? Have you ever been in this position? In that moment, did you choose to snuff out her light or give it the chance to shine again? Does regret arrive before the act, during it, or only after the damage is done? Leave your comments because I'll love to read your unique experiences. Now say a word of prayer for Breasia Terrell. Telling Brea's story is the part of this work that stays with you long after you've closed the file. You think you can prepare yourself, that you can keep some distance, but you can't. Not when the victim is a child. Not when every detail feels like it could belong to someone you know. And here's the thing most people never expect. It didn't happen in some far-off, dangerous city. Not in the headlines we're conditioned to scroll past. This unfolded in a place where front doors stay unlocked, where neighbors wave from their porches, and where the loudest noise at night is the hum of streetlights. But even there, safety was an illusion. So, where was this small-town nightmare born? That's the part you'll remember. She was last seen climbing into the back seat of his car. It wasn't night yet. Daylight still clung to the streets, the kind of summer evening where kids in Oregon are riding their bikes, where families in Kentucky are firing up their grills, where life in Maine is winding down with the sound of ocean waves. But for Breasia Terrell, the clock was already ticking. By the next morning, she was gone. The summer of 2020 had settled over Davenport, Iowa, thick and unmoving. The kind of heat that makes the nights feel heavy. Streets were quiet, porches still, windows open, just enough to let in the faint hum of crickets. Somewhere in that stillness, a darkness was moving, quiet, deliberate, and unseen. At the center of it all was a little girl named Breasia Terrell, 10 years old with a grin that could light up the room before she even said a word. She loved basketball, sketching her own worlds on paper and singing along to her favorite songs until she lost her breath. She was playful and caring, but she had a steel thread of strength running through her, the kind that made her stand up for what was right, even at her age. Brea's life had not been without its changes. Her parents had separated early on, but her mother, Aisha, had built a home filled with love and family. For a few years, Aisha's boyfriend, Henry Dinkins, had been a steady presence, helping to raise Bresia from the time she was 2. When the relationship ended, so did Henry's role in Brea's daily life. The years passed, and contact grew distant. That summer, though, Henry began to reappear. He had a new girlfriend now and hosted neighborhood cookouts, the smell of grilled meat drifting over sidewalks, music spilling into the night air. He reconnected with his young son, DL, Brea's half-brother, offering small gestures that hinted at a man trying to be involved again. On the morning of July 9th, Henry arrived to take DL for the weekend. Bresia happened to be there, and DL asked if she could come too. It was a simple question, a sister wanting to spend time with her brother, a mother remembering that Henry had once been a trusted part of her child's life. Aisha agreed, but when the 13-year-old boy, her other brother, asked to join, Henry refused. His excuse was simple. There wasn't enough room in the car for 3 kids. It sounded believable until you saw the car. That day, Henry was driving a black Camaro, the kind with room in the front and back, enough to fit everyone. There was plenty of space, but for reasons he didn't explain, Henry didn't want the 13-year-old there, And so it was just Bria and her younger brother, DL, who climbed into the Camaro that day. The door shut, the engine roared, and they were gone. Their first stop wasn't home. Henry took the kids to his friend Vincent Howard's house. Inside, the afternoon passed easily. The kids played video games while Henry came and went. At one point, he left for a while, returning later as if nothing had happened. Then they moved on. There was another visit to Henry's cousin's place, where the kids met more family and played for a while. And although Henry had his own spot at an RV park in town, he mostly stayed at his girlfriend's one-bedroom apartment. That's where they went next. When they arrived at the small apartment complex, the rain was starting to settle in. Henry's girlfriend, Andrea Culverson, was inside working at her computer. She worked remotely for AT&T, headset on, eyes locked to the screen. Bria was curious. She leaned over Andrea's shoulder, fascinated by what she was doing. Andrea showed her a bit of her work. In the living room, DL kept himself busy with video games. The evening passed quietly. Showers were taken, games were played, beds were prepared. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Meanwhile, Aisha, Bria's mother, had just gotten off work when she realized something. Bria didn't have clothes for the weekend. Without hesitation, she rushed home, grabbed a bag, and drove across town to the apartment complex. She'd never been to Andrea's apartment before, but she knew the area well. When she arrived, she called Henry from the parking lot. Bria came running down to meet her. In her arms, Aisha held the weekend bag, and in the car, the family dog sat, tail wagging. Bria's face lit up when she saw the dog. She wanted to take it upstairs. For a brief second, the night felt normal, but Aisha called her back. The dog was going home. Clothes were handed over. A quick "love you," the kind every parent says, believing there will always be another one. It was raining hard now. Their goodbye was short. Aisha watched as her daughter ran through the downpour, clutching the bag, disappearing back into the shadows of apartment 8. She didn't know it yet, but that fleeting moment, in the rain under the glow of the parking lot lights, would be the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. Later that night, the world outside was quiet. Inside her apartment, Aisha sank into the couch. It had been a long day. The first night in a long time she didn't have her kids. She'd run the errands, worked her shift, rushed clothes over in the rain. Now she let herself breathe. A hot bath, the TV low in the background, the kind of stillness that tricks you into thinking everything is fine. She closed her eyes. Sleep took her quickly. While she slept, somewhere across town in apartment 8, Bria and her little brother had no cell phones, no way to reach her. But Henry's girlfriend, Andrea's phone lit up, a call from Henry's number. It went unanswered. Then came a text. "Good night, Mommy. I love you." It was Bria. The words were simple, sent between 10 and 11 p.m., and Aisha had no way of knowing they would be the last her daughter would ever send. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Henry. "I just woke up and Bria is gone." Her stomach dropped. She called him, once, twice, again and again. No answer. When he finally picked up, his voice was flat. They had all gone to bed, and when they woke, Bria wasn't there. Aisha's chest tightened. This couldn't be real. She called a family member in a panic. "Henry said Bria's missing." "What do you mean, missing?" Henry offered little, said he was out looking for her, planning to make a police report. But when Aisha pressed, it became clear he hadn't told the police anything yet. He claimed he was in the car with DL, headed to the station. Aisha didn't wait. She called the police herself. Her manager at Checkers saw her breaking down in the back room and told her to go, get to the station, find out what was happening. She grabbed her keys, but on the way downtown, something caught her eye. Henry's car. He wasn't headed toward the police station. He was flying down the street in the opposite direction, taking a hard left onto Eastern Avenue. She made a U-turn, got on his bumper, and leaned on her horn. She called him again. When he finally answered, his story shifted. He said he was going to Jersey Meadows because they wanted to talk to him there. Still, Aisha stayed glued to his tail. They pulled over near a McDonald's. His words tumbled out in a ramble about not knowing his home address, needing to turn back and get it. None of it made sense. Aisha's eyes dropped to his shoes, caked in mud. They got back in their cars, Aisha still following him, now toward the apartment. She also stayed in contact with Davenport PD. An officer was sent to meet them. By 8:55 a.m., the cruiser rolled up. The rain from the night before had left the ground slick, the air heavy. Henry stepped forward with DL at his side. "When was the last time you saw her?" the officer asked. "In the house," Henry said. "Last night, about 9:30, she was in the bed." It was a strange, disjointed conversation. Henry couldn't remember his address, couldn't remember his phone number, couldn't give a clear answer about what she'd been wearing. Shorts, maybe. What color? He didn't know. Height? He guessed. Weight? He wasn't sure. Hair? Long dreads, somewhere between the shoulders and mid-back. Maybe. Standing there, the facts didn't line up. The girl was gone. The man who had been with her last couldn't recall the simplest details. And in that parking lot, under the gray Iowa sky, the clock had already been ticking for hours. Henry had searched for Bria, but only from the driver's seat of his car. He hadn't spoken to neighbors, hadn't knocked on doors. He said he didn't know the people around here, as if that was reason enough. Instead, he called Bria's phone, drove aimlessly, and told himself she might be with a friend. Aisha's search was different, frantic, relentless. She'd called everyone she could think of, pulled in family from across town. Her uncle was driving the streets, her mother checking nearby blocks. To her, there was no world in which Bria had simply walked away, not at 8 in the morning, not into a neighborhood she didn't know. The tension between them was building like a storm. Frustration boiled over into accusations. Each word carried the sting of blame. The focus was slipping, the search fracturing. Aisha's anger finally pushed her to walk away, determined to continue the hunt with her own family. With her gone, the officer turned his attention to the apartment. Every corner was checked, every closet opened. But there was nothing, just empty spaces and unanswered questions. When the officer stepped back outside, Henry was gone. No one had seen him leave. He wasn't at the station either. Instead, he'd gone to his mother's apartment. It was a small detail, but one that stood out. He wore the same clothes as before, but different shoes. Meanwhile, officers spread out into the surrounding streets. They knocked on doors, scanned alleys, and posted flyers. But as the hours dragged on, the optimism began to fade. Those who knew Bria best were certain she hadn't run away. She wouldn't leave a place she didn't recognize. Something had happened, something that kept her from coming back. The clock was still ticking, but hope was slipping through their fingers. Bria had never been the kind of child to wander off. Not at home, not in familiar places, and certainly not somewhere unfamiliar. That was the first thing everyone who knew her made clear. She didn't roam. She didn't take off without telling someone. While officers combed through the neighborhood, others turned to surveillance footage from nearby businesses. But they didn't see Bria on the streets that morning. Instead, they saw something else. Henry's maroon Chevy Impala, weaving through different parts of town in the early hours of July 10th, 2020. When Henry arrived at the police station, the detectives quickly zeroed in on that detail. Where was the Impala now? It wasn't parked outside. Henry claimed it was with a friend. From there, they began piecing together his version of the night. The children had gone to bed, he said. Sometime after, he left to visit a friend, but when he got there, no one was home. He returned to the apartment, glanced around, and that's when he noticed Bria was gone. Or at least, that's what he claimed. His timeline shifted, faltered, hours blurred together in a haze of uncertainty and contradictions. He described heading out again, this time to a convenience store for cigarettes. By the time he got back, his son was awake. They searched, but he admitted it was only a little look around before calling Aisha. At first, she didn't believe him. She thought it was some sort of twisted joke. But as the words sank in, disbelief turned to fury. They agreed to meet at a Burger King. By the time she arrived, she was seething, accusing him of the one thing he already feared she believed, that he had failed Bria. Henry tried to calm her, insisting that panic wouldn't help, but the weight of her words crushed him. He knew she was right. Whatever had happened, Bria had been in his care, and now she was gone. The clock kept ticking, but answers were no closer. When Aisha finally decided to call 911, the air in Andrea's apartment shifted. Moments earlier, it had been filled with a tense, uncertain quiet. The kind where no one is ready to say the word missing out loud. But now, with a police cruiser on the way, that unspoken fear was turning into reality. Henry hadn't made the call himself. His original plan, he claimed, was to go directly to the police station. But Aisha urged him to stay, reasoning that it would be easier to call from the apartment where Bria had last been seen. She wanted to be ready to give officers the exact details they would need. At first, Henry didn't believe Bria was gone. Maybe she was tucked away in another room. Maybe she'd slipped over to a neighbor's unit without mentioning it. But when the responding officer arrived and still no one could find her, the weight of the truth hit him. Bria wasn't just out of sight. She was gone. The officer began piecing together the morning's events, trying to nail down a timeline. That's where things became murky. Henry struggled to recall when exactly he realized Bria was missing. He mentioned stepping out for cigarettes and coming back. Somewhere in between, her absence became clear. But as for the exact time, it slipped through his memory like water through fingers. Once he noticed she wasn't in her room, Henry said his first instinct was to go outside. He started with a quick walk around the apartment complex, scanning for any sign of her. Then he expanded his search, drifting into nearby streets, checking sidewalks, peering into open spaces between buildings. He didn't keep to a fixed route. He moved wherever his eyes or instincts pulled him. He remembered passing local businesses, tracing roads that led both deeper into the neighborhood and back toward the main road. One landmark stood out in his memory, the faded shell of an old Blockbuster store. Still, the search was aimless, and the details of where he went and when he went there remained frustratingly unclear. And then there was the matter of his car. Henry had been driving a maroon Chevy Impala, but by the time police were speaking to him, it wasn't outside the apartment or at the station. When asked, Henry said it was with a friend. He admitted leaving the apartment complex in it, but claimed he hadn't been the one driving the whole time. Instead, he insisted, a friend had dropped him off at the police station. That explanation began to crumble when officers found the Impala parked just a block away from the station. The discovery suggested something far different, that Henry had driven it himself, parked it there to avoid an immediate search, and then walked over to speak with police. The questions then turned to his phone records. Who had he called that morning? Who had he texted? Henry said there were only 1 or 2 texts, nothing significant. Detectives asked to download his phone to verify the logs and timestamps. Henry resisted, saying it wasn't necessary. He would simply show them the phone himself, unlock it right there in front of them, and scroll through the records. The detective agreed. As Henry left to retrieve the device, he remarked that there wasn't much to stick out in his activity that morning. He said he could point to every place he'd been, but given how much of his story had already shifted, investigators weren't so sure. The interview room falls silent. The hum of the overhead light is the only sound left as the screen fades to black. And then, the search continues. While Henry sat in that interrogation room, refusing to answer certain questions, the entire city was moving. Patrol cars swept through side streets, volunteers combed through grassy fields with flashlights, flyers with Bria's face taped to every lamppost fluttered in the warm night wind. But the hours dragged on with no sign of the 10-year-old. Investigators began piecing together Henry's movements that day. His Chevy Impala was caught on camera, driving back and forth through different parts of Davenport from 2:13 a.m. until the moment police were called. Something about the pattern didn't make sense, almost as if he was circling the same areas over and over. Search warrants were executed on everything: his apartment, his car, his RV. By nightfall, nothing concrete had turned up, just an unsettling discovery: a child's flip-flop lying in the dirt. For a moment, hope flickered, but Bria's mother, Aisha, quickly confirmed it wasn't hers. Inside Henry's RV, the crime scene team moved slowly, documenting every inch. The kitchen, the narrow hallway, the back bedroom. Beneath the bed, a small table, and in the corner, a bottle of bleach. In the closet, more cleaning supplies. On a shelf, the metallic glint of a machete. Individually, none of it proved a crime, but together it told investigators one thing: Henry was hiding something. And then came the detail they couldn't ignore. Henry was a registered offender with a history of violence and a long list of arrests. Worse, he hadn't registered his new address, a direct violation of the law, and one that allowed them to lock him up while they searched for more answers. But even from a jail cell, Henry kept his secrets. No confession, no clue where Bria was. Just a chilling comment to another inmate: they're never going to find her. Months would pass before that claim was proven wrong. Night settled quietly over the apartment, the kind of stillness where every creak in the floorboards feels louder than it should. After dinner, Henry told the kids it was time for baths. Bria didn't get her usual pajamas afterward. Henry handed her one of his oversized white t-shirts instead. They ate together, and Bria was the first to retreat to the bedroom she shared with DL, leaving Henry and his girlfriend Andrea to claim the blow-up mattress in the living room. From Andrea's spot, you could see straight into the bedroom. The bed was in clear view through the doorway, and when Bria slipped under the covers, she seemed to vanish into the stillness of sleep. Around 11:30 p.m., Andrea drifted off herself, her last memory of the night being Henry telling DL to wrap up his video game and head to bed. But Henry didn't sleep. Something darker was running through his mind, something that had been there for a long time. Just past midnight, DL crawled into bed next to his sister. Henry settled himself on the couch, but his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. By 2 a.m., he was up, moving with purpose. He quietly woke Bria, speaking to her in a way that seemed casual enough not to alarm DL. They slipped out the front door together, talking about cars as they disappeared into the night. The maroon Chevy Impala carried them away, caught on surveillance heading north at 2:13 a.m. It was later seen near Henry's RV, a bare, lifeless space with no electricity, no running water, just a bed, and a bottle of bleach tucked away underneath it. Investigators believed Henry brought her there for a reason, one he couldn't carry out inside the apartment. Back at the apartment, Andrea stirred around 3 a.m., her body waking her for a quick trip to the bathroom. But something felt wrong the moment she stepped into the hallway. The bedroom was missing its smallest occupant. Henry's spot was empty too. The longer she looked, the more uneasy she felt. His phone was still sitting on the counter, which meant he hadn't left for a simple errand. She checked the bathroom again, the kitchen, the living room, everywhere. Nothing. Then, at 3:30 a.m., she heard footsteps on the stairs. Henry appeared in the doorway wearing different clothes than he'd had on earlier that night. When Andrea questioned him, he brushed her off. disappearing into the closet to grab something she couldn't quite see. She went to the window, and that's when she froze. Outside, standing alone next to the Chevy Impala, was Bria. While Andrea felt a wave of relief seeing Bria outside the car, something still gnawed at her, an unease she couldn't quite explain. Moments later, Henry left the apartment with Bria at his side. She watched from the window as they disappeared down the stairs. Seconds passed. The Chevy Impala rolled forward, its tinted windows hiding whatever was inside. And then, nothing. Bria was no longer in sight. At 3:33 a.m., the Impala pulled into a quiet roadside convenience store. Henry would later claim he stopped only for cigarettes, but surveillance footage told a different story. Cash in hand, $35 worth of gas. No paper trail. From there, he drove toward an isolated stretch of land known as Credit Island. The rain fell harder now, soaking the ground and drumming against the windshield. He parked near the roadside, told Bria to get out, and gestured toward the dark tree line. She followed him down a steep, muddy embankment, the sound of water nearby. Under the cover of storm and shadows, Henry pulled a gun. 2 quick shots, no one heard. Bria's body was left where she fell, swallowed by the wet earth. Henry turned back alone, rain plastering his clothes to his skin. By the time he reached the car, the Impala was stuck in the thick mud. Panic set in. He abandoned the driver's seat and stumbled out into the rain, searching for help. And then, headlights. A pickup slowed as he stepped into the lane, waving it down. The driver, a man named Jared, cracked his window. Henry, shivering, asked for a tow. Jared noticed the details. A heavy-set man, about 6 feet tall, white shorts despite the cool air. In minutes, Jared had hooked a chain to the Impala and pulled it free. Henry offered him $100. Jared refused, telling him to do something nice for someone else. Jared saw no one else in the car, no movement in the back seat, no small figure waiting in the shadows. At 4:30 a.m., Henry was free again, steering back toward Highway 61. Less than an hour later, at the Jersey Meadow apartments, 8-year-old DL woke up crying. Andrea tried to calm him, telling him to lie in the living room. By 5:55 a.m., Henry was back home, calm, collected, and alone. Andrea kept pressing Henry for answers, but he offered none. His face was a mask, flat, unreadable, giving nothing away. Without warning, he told DL to grab his bag. The boy hesitated, but his father was already heading for the door. Henry tried to leave his phone behind, but Andrea stopped him. Once it had charged, she handed it over. "Take it so I can call you," she said. He said nothing, just slipped it into his pocket. For the next 45 minutes, Henry drove aimlessly through the pre-dawn streets. Instead of the Walmart in Davenport, he headed toward the one in Clinton. A deliberate choice. Cameras there would be less likely to connect him to what was coming. At 6:58 a.m., the maroon Chevy Impala pulled into the Clinton Walmart parking lot. Henry was still wearing the same white shorts, black do-rag, and gold shoes he'd had on hours earlier. He went straight for the cleaning aisle. 2 large bottles of Clorox bleach, 81 ounces each, went into his cart. He scanned one bottle twice, paying in cash, leaving no card trail. Outside in the car, DL sat quietly, playing with his father's phone. From there, Henry drove to Credit Island, an isolated patch of land bordered by water and thick brush. Before stepping out, he opened the trunk and pulled out the bleach and a machete. DL stayed in the car, unaware of what lay just beyond the tree line. Henry pushed through the undergrowth, the machete clearing a path. Somewhere in the shadows, he began covering Bria's body with cut brush. Then he poured bleach, soaking the ground, her clothes, anything that might hold his DNA. When he returned, DL noticed the machete. A big one, still damp. Henry told him a story, that he'd been fishing with friends earlier. But there were no fishing poles in the car. No tackle, just bleach, a knife, and the smell of rain-damp earth clinging to his clothes. Back at the RV, DL stayed in the car as his father stepped inside. Henry poured bleach over the blade, then wiped it clean with a rag before tucking it away. By then, every move he made was about erasing traces, both from the island and from his own hands. It's chilling to think. As he covered the body of a 10-year-old girl, Henry's own 8-year-old son was just a few yards away, watching, waiting, and unknowingly becoming a silent witness to the cover-up. Throughout that morning, Henry moved quietly, making each purchase with cash, careful to avoid leaving a digital trail. He believed his phone had remained off the entire time, convinced he had erased every trace of what he'd done. Only then did he reach out to Aisha, informing her of Bria's disappearance. A message calculated, not frantic. In March 2021, the search ended in heartbreak. Bria's remains were found and suspicion quickly closed in on Henry Dinkins. He had spent sleepless nights after her death, driving across town, scrubbing every surface, and hiding every possible link to the crime. Yet, despite his efforts, the shadows of his actions followed him. By August 2023, he stood in court, charged with the murder and kidnapping of 10-year-old Bria Terrell. Henry pleaded not guilty, waiving his right to a jury and choosing instead to place his fate in the hands of a single judge. It would not be an easy conviction for the prosecution. Physical evidence was scarce. Authorities searched his RV but found no trace of Bria's DNA, likely the result of his obsessive cleaning. Bleach bottles were discovered tucked beneath the sink. A machete hidden above the microwave bore faint white fibers along its serrated edge, a silent hint of recent scrubbing. The same absence of evidence extended to his maroon Chevy Impala. No DNA, no fingerprints tying Bria to the vehicle. At the dumping site, time and decomposition had stripped away most clues. The only physical story left behind was told by the splintered brush, sharp cuts on the branches that matched the machete's bite. Lacking hard evidence, prosecutors leaned heavily on two pillars: the cold eye of surveillance footage and the unwavering testimony of those who had seen him that morning. Video showed Henry in the early hours, his headlights slicing through the darkness as he left the lot where his RV was parked. Minutes later, the same sedan appeared at Credit Island, arriving and leaving within a narrow 2-minute window. And then there was DL, Henry's own son. By 2023, the boy was 11 years old, but the morning of Bria's death was still etched in his mind. He remembered the bleach, the machete, the waiting in the car. Alongside Andrea's testimony, his account became the backbone of the prosecution's case. In the end, despite the lack of DNA, despite Henry's attempts to scrub away his crime, the pieces came together. Witness accounts, camera footage, the calculated movements of a man who thought he could erase a life and vanish without consequence. The judge delivered the verdict with precision. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of first-degree kidnapping, Henry Earl Dinkins, 51 years old, would spend the rest of his life defined by the crime he tried so desperately to hide. And it was DL, an innocent child dragged into his father's nightmare, whose courage ensured Bria's voice would not be silenced. On October 11th, 2023, the gavel fell for the final time. Henry Dinkins was sentenced to 2 mandatory life terms, one for the kidnapping, the other for the murder of 10-year-old Bria Terrell. It was a sentence that would ensure he would never walk free again. Given the chance to speak, Henry chose not to express remorse, but to turn his words toward grievance. He condemned the judge, criticized his own attorneys, and claimed that the verdict against him was the result of racial bias. In his eyes, the outcome had been decided long before the trial began. But inside that courtroom, his defiance was met with something far heavier than legal arguments: Aisha's voice. In her victim impact statement, Bria's mother did not speak in abstractions. Her words were sharp and relentless, cutting through the air with the raw anguish only a grieving mother could know. She demanded to know what her daughter's final moments had been like. She spoke of fear, of pain, of the innocence stolen from her child. She painted the image of hazel eyes dimming to darkness and asked questions Henry would never answer. Her grief made clear that no sentence, no verdict could ever be called justice. When the proceedings ended, Henry was led away, his life reduced to walls, steel doors, and the quiet echo of the crimes he could never erase. For the family, the trial's end marked another painful chapter. Bria's remains, held throughout the investigation, could finally be laid to rest. In Davenport, the loss was felt far beyond her home. The city bore the weight of her absence. Murals, photographs, and makeshift memorials stand as permanent testaments to a little girl whose life had been brimming with potential. People still come, leaving flowers, toys, and whispered prayers. Her memory lingers not only in the hearts of her loved ones, but in the conscience of an entire community. Bria's story should never have had to be told like this. She should have been here, growing, laughing, safe. Instead, we are left with a truth that will never stop aching. Her life was stolen, and the ripples of that act will be felt for generations. But telling her story is more than remembering. It's protecting. Every time her name is spoken, every time her face is seen, another person learns what danger can look like and how fragile safety can be for a child. Awareness is a shield, but only if it's shared. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. A simple like pushes Bria's name into more feeds, reaching people who may never have known her story. A share carries her memory into homes where it can start conversations that matter. And a subscription isn't just clicking a button. It's standing with a community that refuses to be silent about violence against children. Together, we can make sure Bria is never forgotten. Together, we can make her story the reason another child is saved.